On a seemingly perfect honeymoon, a tragic crime unfolded in Paradise One that would send shockwaves through a luxury resort and leave a family shattered. What began as a romantic getaway at a resort in Nassau, Bahamas, quickly turned into an unimaginable nightmare when 63-year-old Clara Matthews was found dead in her honeymoon suite. Her life brutally cut short by the very man she trusted the most. Was it an act of passion, or a dark secret long hidden beneath a perfect facade? Stay with us as we unravel the chilling details of betrayal, manipulation, and a tragedy that no one could have seen coming. Welcome to Silent Crime Case, where the truth is waiting to be uncovered. In the early morning hours of April 7, 2010, the peaceful and luxurious resort in Nassau, Bahamas, was thrust into a terrifying nightmare. A honeymoon suite, once the epitome of romance and luxury, became the setting of unimaginable horror. The body of 63-year-old Clara Matthews was discovered lying lifeless on the marble floor of her suite. Blood pooled around her, a gruesome sight that sent shockwaves through the resort. Clara, the bride, had arrived just days earlier with her new husband, 66-year-old former soldier Thomas Matthews. What should have been a dream vacation quickly turned into a chilling tragedy that would change everything. The moment security entered the suite, they were hit by a stench of alcohol and the chaos that had unfolded inside. The room was in complete disarray. Overturned furniture, broken glass, and bloodstains painted a disturbing picture of violence. Clara's body, bruised and battered, was sprawled on the floor, her expression frozen in a mix of terror and pain. Defensive wounds were visible on her arms, indicating a fierce struggle to protect herself. Nearby, a champagne bottle, once a symbol of their wedding celebration, lay shattered, its jagged edges showing signs of having been used as a weapon. The serenity of the resort's 5th floor, once a haven for vacationers, was now tainted by the brutality that had taken place within the walls of this suite. The police were alerted immediately. As they secured the area, their attention shifted to Thomas Matthews, Clara's husband. He was found sitting silently on the balcony, a few yards away from the carnage. His bloodied hands rested on the chair's armrests, and his face bore the vacant look of a man lost in his own thoughts. He didn't seem to grasp the gravity of the situation, as if his mind had retreated somewhere dark and distant. Thomas Matthews, a decorated war veteran, seemed detached from the horrors that surrounded him. His response to the officer's questions was sluggish and vague. He mumbled incoherently about the evening's events, barely able to string together a coherent explanation. The smell of rum lingered heavily on his clothes, confirming what the investigators would soon discover. Thomas had been drinking heavily, a detail that would play a crucial role in the investigation. As the police began to piece together the timeline of events, disturbing details emerged. Witnesses had reported hearing loud arguments coming from the suite the night before Clara's death. Guests on the same floor described hearing raised voices followed by the sounds of furniture crashing and the unmistakable noise of something heavy hitting the floor. One guest reported hearing Clara's voice raised in anger, followed by a chilling scream. "You lied to me." The words echoed down the hallway, but then silence. The screaming stopped, and an eerie calm descended over the hallway. The tension in the air was palpable. It was clear that something sinister had unfolded inside the suite. But the question remained, what exactly had happened? When police formally interrogated Thomas the following day, his responses raised even more red flags. He claimed to have no memory of the events leading to Clara's death. He admitted to being intoxicated, which the police found to be true, given the several empty bottles of rum found scattered around the room. Despite his intoxication, the physical evidence told a different story. His knuckles were bruised and bloodied, consistent with a violent altercation. The marks on his hands suggested that he had been directly involved in the brutal struggle that had ended in Clara's death. But Thomas offered no explanation, only a confused admission that he had woken up on the balcony with no recollection of what had occurred inside the room. As the investigation progressed, detectives began to uncover troubling details about Thomas and Clara's relationship. Clara, once a lively and independent woman, had been searching for love after the death of her first husband. She had dedicated her life to her work as a teacher, touching the lives of many, but secretly battled loneliness after her husband passed away. Her yearning for companionship eventually led her to Thomas Matthews. Their relationship moved quickly, almost too quickly, after meeting at a charity event in Nassau in late August 2009. Thomas, a retired Marine and Vietnam War veteran, exuded a quiet confidence that initially drew Clara to him. He was charming and attentive, often making Clara feel seen and valued after years of solitude. Within weeks of meeting, Thomas began visiting Clara at her home in Nassau. He brought her flowers and took her out on romantic dinners. Clara's friends noticed a significant shift in her demeanor. She was more animated, optimistic, and excited about the future. They believed she had found someone to fill the void left by her late husband. However, as their relationship deepened, subtle warning signs began to surface. Thomas rarely spoke about his life before meeting Clara. He never mentioned family or friends, and when Clara tried to probe into his past, he deflected, making vague remarks or changing the subject altogether. Clara felt uncomfortable but convinced herself it was due to his traumatic military service. Little did she know, Thomas had a history of explosive temper tantrums, something he carefully hid from her. His friends and acquaintances spoke of him as a man with deep, unresolved anger issues that would come to the surface in their tragic final moments together. But the most damaging secret Clara discovered occurred just weeks before their honeymoon. While helping Thomas pack for their wedding trip, she stumbled upon a series of flirtatious emails from a younger woman named Angela. The intimate messages were from months before they met, yet they stirred a sense of betrayal in Clara. Her heart ached as she confronted Thomas about the emails. He dismissed her concerns, claiming the relationship had ended long before he met her. Though his words seemed sincere, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. This betrayal, combined with the underlying emotional tension, was a warning that Clara, torn between love and doubt, chose to ignore. As the wedding day approached, Clara noticed small, unsettling changes in Thomas's behavior. He had begun drinking heavily, a habit that had worsened as their relationship progressed. He would often become moody, withdrawing into himself after long drinking sessions. His sporadic outbursts of anger, especially when they discussed finances, made Clara uneasy. She also became increasingly concerned about his financial instability. Thomas had never been upfront about his debts, and Clara eventually discovered that he was deeply in debt, a fact he had hidden from her. The final straw came just weeks before their honeymoon when Clara learned of another troubling matter. Thomas asked her to co-sign a loan to pay off his debts, framing it as a necessary step to start their new life together. Clara, hesitant at first, ultimately agreed, transferring a significant portion of her savings into a joint account they opened together. This decision weighed heavily on her, but she believed in supporting Thomas as they started their life together. However, friends noticed a shift in Clara's demeanor. She seemed more reserved, as if burdened by an invisible weight. Her concerns about Thomas's spending habits and financial instability grew, yet she convinced herself that every relationship required compromise and trust. Despite the increasing doubts, Clara pressed on. She wanted to believe in Thomas, hoping that their love and patience would be enough to overcome the growing cracks in their relationship. Her best friend Maria, always pragmatic, had advised her to take things slow, but Clara chose to move forward. She still loved Thomas, even as her instincts whispered that something wasn't quite right. The couple's honeymoon at the resort in Nassau was supposed to be the perfect escape, a chance to reconnect and celebrate their new life together. But beneath the idyllic setting, tensions were simmering. Clara, dressed in a flowing floral dress, radiated a quiet beauty as they dined by the ocean on March 6, 2010. But those around them noticed something was off. Thomas seemed distant, distracted, and uncharacteristically tense. The waitstaff, accustomed to the playful banter of honeymooners, noticed the silence between the couple. They weren't engaging in the usual jovial conversation, and Clara seemed withdrawn, her attention fixated on her plate. Midway through dinner, the tension finally erupted. Thomas became visibly agitated, his jaw tightening as Clara leaned forward, speaking in a low, trembling voice. Guests nearby could see that something was wrong, though the conversation was mostly inaudible. The waiter recalled Clara's words, her voice wavering as she said something that seemed to strike a nerve in Thomas. His body stiffened, and moments later, Clara abruptly stood, pushing her chair back violently. She stormed out of the restaurant, leaving Thomas to remain seated for a while, staring at his drink with a haunted expression. Clara walked swiftly through the resort, her hands clenched at her sides. A guest near the pool noticed her sitting on a bench, her face buried in her hands, as if overwhelmed with emotion. The guest considered approaching her but ultimately decided against it, assuming she needed solitude. Meanwhile, Thomas spent over an hour at the bar, drinking heavily, his demeanor shifting from silent brooding to visible frustration. As the evening wore on, the emotional weight between the two grew unbearable. What had started as a romantic honeymoon was quickly spiraling into an unavoidable conflict. Around 1:30 a.m., Clara returned to the suite, her steps slow and hesitant. Security cameras captured her walking through the dimly lit hallway. Her shoulders slumped and head lowered, her purse clutched tightly against her body. The tension from the argument earlier in the evening still lingered in the air. Thomas, meanwhile, had been at the bar for over an hour, drinking heavily, and it was clear that his emotions had been growing increasingly volatile. Staff noted that he seemed both brooding and irritated, with no signs of the charming man Clara had once known. What happened next inside the suite remains a matter of speculation and analysis. Though security footage showed Clara returning alone, it's what happened behind closed doors that would become the focus of the investigation. Around 2 a.m., Thomas was captured walking back toward the suite. At first, he moved slowly, almost as if he was deep in thought, but as he approached the door, his pace quickened. He seemed agitated, running his hands through his hair, clenching and unclenching his fists as though preparing for something. What followed is a mystery, but one thing was clear. The emotional tension had finally reached its breaking point. Neighbors in the adjacent rooms began to hear sounds that seemed out of place. Clara's voice, once calm, grew louder. Her words, though muffled, were unmistakably filled with desperation. At first, it seemed like a normal argument, but then Clara's voice cracked with panic. She sounded cornered, pleading as if trying to reason with a man who had already crossed a dangerous line. Thomas's voice, low and forceful, drowned hers out. It was clear this wasn't just a lover's spat, it was something far more sinister. The tension between the couple escalated quickly into violence. According to the accounts of nearby guests, the argument turned physical with terrifying intensity. Around 2:30 a.m., the walls of the suite seemed to shake with the sound of loud crashes, furniture being overturned, something heavy hitting the wall. The noises were so violent that at least one guest briefly considered calling hotel security, but they hesitated, assuming it was just another lover's quarrel. After all, honeymooners often argued, right? But the chaos inside the suite was anything but typical. Moments later, the sound stopped abruptly, only to be replaced by a chilling, blood-curdling scream so sharp and filled with terror that it seemed to freeze the air. The scream echoed down the hallway, a sound that sent shivers down the spines of everyone who heard it. One neighbor, who would later speak to the police, described the scream as the kind that makes your blood run cold. This wasn't a cry for help. It was the cry of a woman whose life was slipping away. When the silence finally settled over the hallway, it was an eerie calm, one that suggested nothing good had followed. Inside the suite, Clara had fought for her life. Forensic evidence would later confirm the severity of the struggle. Overturned furniture and broken glass indicated that she had been desperately trying to escape, to defend herself against the man she had once trusted. Blood splatters on the walls and floor told the grim tale of her last moments, where she had fallen repeatedly in her attempts to flee, before being struck again by a forceful blow. By the time Clara's body was discovered by hotel staff on the morning of April 7, 2010, the reality of the situation had set in. The resort, which had once been a sanctuary of relaxation and peace, now bore the scar of a horrific crime. The honeymoon suite was no longer a place of love. It was a crime scene. The team of forensic officers arrived swiftly, and as they began their investigation, they were faced with a harrowing sight. Clara Matthews' lifeless body lay in the center of the suite, surrounded by blood and chaos. The suite, which had been beautifully designed with cream-colored walls and a view of the ocean, now looked unrecognizable. Furniture was overturned, glass shards were scattered across the floor, and the bed was disheveled. The champagne bottle that had been placed on the bed as part of the honeymoon package was now shattered. Its jagged pieces lay near Clara's body, suggesting it had been used as a weapon during the brutal altercation. The scene painted a disturbing picture of violence and betrayal, one that would haunt the investigators long after they left the scene. The police immediately secured the area and began processing the crime scene, photographing every detail and documenting all the physical evidence. Each piece of the puzzle, from the bloodstains to the broken glass, would play a crucial role in uncovering what had happened in those final hours. It was clear that Clara had fought back, but the question remained: had she been betrayed by the man who was supposed to love and protect her? As the investigation into Clara Matthews' murder began to unfold, it quickly became evident that this case was no ordinary crime. The police were not just investigating a random act of violence. They were unraveling a deeply complicated and emotionally charged situation. One of the first pieces of evidence they turned their attention to was the couple's relationship. What appeared to be a fairy tale romance had, in reality, been fraught with red flags and hidden tensions. Detectives learned that Thomas Matthews had a history of anger issues. Though he had never been violent in his past relationships, his time in the Vietnam War had left him with deep emotional scars. Friends described his temper as unpredictable, often triggered by minor frustrations. Thomas had been open about his struggles with PTSD, but as the investigation revealed, his past trauma may have played a more significant role in the tragedy than anyone had realized. Clara, on the other hand, had been an optimistic woman, hopeful for a second chance at love after the death of her first husband. She had trusted Thomas with her heart and her finances, believing that their marriage would be a fresh start. Yet, as the investigation progressed, troubling details began to emerge. Clara had recently transferred a significant amount of money into a joint account with Thomas, a decision she later regretted. It was clear that Thomas had been financially unstable, and it was possible that his desperation for money had played a role in the violence that ensued. The timeline leading up to Clara's tragic death became clearer with each passing hour. Clara had, in her final days, shown signs of doubt about her relationship with Thomas. Despite his reassurances, she had become increasingly concerned about his emotional instability and financial issues. The night before her death, she had confronted him about his past relationships, including a series of flirtatious emails he had exchanged with a younger woman. Though Thomas had dismissed her concerns, Clara was not convinced. Her suspicions, however, were too late to change the course of events. As the clock struck midnight on March 6th, Clara and Thomas's romantic evening at the resort turned into a bitter argument. The frustration that had been building in both of them for weeks finally reached a boiling point. The once quiet man who had charmed Clara with his military stories had turned into someone else entirely, someone filled with rage and self-loathing. The arguments had become louder, more vicious, and ultimately Clara's cries for help went unanswered. What had started as a night of love and celebration ended in a brutal tragedy, and no one could have predicted just how far things would spiral. As the investigation deepened, it became evident that Thomas Matthews was not the man he appeared to be. Despite his initial claims of amnesia, forensic evidence painted a different picture. The bruises on his knuckles, the bloodstains on his hands, and the overwhelming signs of violence suggested that Thomas had been directly involved in his wife's death. As investigators pieced together the timeline of events, they discovered a pattern of deceit, manipulation, and financial desperation that pointed to a clear motive. On March 20, 2010, just over 2 weeks after Clara's tragic death, Thomas Matthews was formally arrested and charged with the murder of his wife. The evidence against him was overwhelming. The toxic combination of alcohol, anger, and financial stress had pushed him past the point of no return. As he was led out of the resort in handcuffs, the community was left to grapple with the reality of what had occurred behind the closed doors of the Honeymoon suite. The man they had once regarded as a respected war veteran and pillar of the community was now a murderer. Clara's family, particularly her sister Margaret, was devastated by the news. The woman they had loved and admired was gone, and the man responsible for her death was someone they had trusted. The arrest marked the beginning of a long and painful journey toward justice, but for Clara's family the sense of loss would never truly fade. The trial of Thomas Matthews began in September 2010, nearly 6 months after Clara's death. The courtroom was filled with tension, with emotions ranging from anger to disbelief. Clara's family, along with a public eager for answers, gathered each day to witness the unfolding drama. The prosecution had a strong case against Thomas, supported by overwhelming physical evidence and emotional testimony. Witnesses testified about the couple's tumultuous relationship, painting a picture of a man who had been consumed by jealousy, financial ruin, and deep-seated insecurities. Experts in PTSD were brought in to explain how Thomas's military service had impacted his mental health, but the prosecution argued that his actions that night were not a result of his trauma. Instead, they highlighted his desperate need for control over his life and his finances. Clara's love for him, her trust, and her kindness had been exploited until it reached a tragic breaking point. The defense, on the other hand, attempted to argue that Thomas's memory loss and intoxication should mitigate his responsibility. They claimed that he had not intended to kill Clara and had merely acted in the heat of the moment. However, the prosecution's case was compelling, with forensic evidence suggesting that Clara had fought for her life in those final moments. As the trial continued, it became clear that Thomas's fate was sealed, but the question remained: how had this man, once seen as a hero, fallen so far? After weeks of harrowing testimony, the jury began deliberations in late November 2010. The courtroom was tense as everyone waited for the verdict. The Matthews family, still reeling from the loss of Clara, held their breath as the foreperson stood to announce the decision. As the words "guilty of second-degree murder" echoed through the courtroom, the room fell silent. For a moment, no one moved. The weight of the moment settled over everyone present, as though the breath of the entire community had been held in anticipation. For Clara's family, it was a bittersweet victory. While the conviction of Thomas Matthews brought some measure of closure, it could not bring Clara back. Margaret, Clara's sister, sat in the front row, her eyes filled with tears. Her sobs were quiet, but her grief was undeniable. The verdict was not a source of joy, but a painful reminder that the woman they had loved and cherished was gone forever. Still, there was some relief in knowing that justice had been served. Thomas Matthews was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge's decision was final, and the courtroom was filled with mixed emotions. For some, it was justice. For others, it was merely a small step toward healing. The Matthews family, still mourning the loss of Clara, could only hope that the trial had brought them closer to understanding what had driven Thomas to commit such an unspeakable act. Clara Matthews's death left an indelible mark on everyone who knew her. She had been a kind, loving woman who had devoted her life to teaching and caring for others. She had lived through the pain of losing her first husband, yet had found the courage to love again. Clara's friends and family remembered her not for the way she died, but for the way she lived. Her legacy was one of warmth, resilience, and a heart full of love for those around her. In the months following the trial, Clara's family worked to honor her memory. They established a scholarship fund in her name to support students pursuing careers in education, recognizing her lifelong dedication to teaching. Clara had shaped the lives of many young minds, and her impact continued through the fund. They held memorials, shared stories of Clara's kindness, and spoke of the joy she had brought to their lives. Though the pain of losing her never fully subsided, they took comfort in the fact that Clara's life had not been in vain. Her death, while tragic, sparked a conversation about the importance of recognizing the warning signs of emotional manipulation and abusive relationships. For those who had been close to Clara, her death was a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of trusting one's instincts. It was a painful lesson that no one could forget, but it also inspired them to live with more compassion, more understanding, and more empathy for others. Thomas Matthews' actions had shattered more than just Clara's life. They had torn apart an entire family. The aftermath of his crime left lasting scars on everyone involved. While Thomas was behind bars, the Matthews family continued to navigate the wreckage of their lives, trying to rebuild what had been broken. The emotional toll of the murder was immense, and the community struggled to reconcile the man they had once admired with the monster he had become. For Thomas, life behind bars was a fate he had earned. He had destroyed a woman's life, betrayed her trust, and left a family broken. His trial had exposed the lies he had lived and the dark truths he had hidden for so long. The facade of a war hero and respected community member had crumbled, leaving only the harsh reality of his actions. But for Clara's family, the pain of her loss would never fully heal. They had hoped for a future filled with her love and warmth, but instead they were left with memories of what could have been. Despite the justice served in the courtroom, there would always be an empty space where Clara had once stood. The betrayal, the lies, and the violence that had taken her from them would forever haunt their lives. As the years passed, Clara Matthews' story became a reminder of the dangers of blind trust, the importance of recognizing the signs of manipulation, and the devastating consequences of betrayal. Her legacy, however, would live on in the hearts of those who loved her. Her light would never be extinguished, even in the face of the darkest tragedy. And so the truth behind Clara Matthews' tragic death was revealed: betrayal, violence, and a life lost far too soon. Her story serves as a painful reminder of the dangers of blind trust and the hidden demons that can lurk behind closed doors. What would have happened if Clara had followed her instincts? Could she have walked away before it was too late? As always, we leave you with these questions to ponder. Thank you for joining us on this heartbreaking journey. If you found this case as shocking as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an episode. And, as always, share your thoughts or theories in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Remember, sometimes the most silent crimes speak the loudest. Until next time, take care and stay safe.